So document 2 is the swim lane diagram for the pre-project design. This is a refresher on what was adopted earlier this year, but also there is a revision here. So my purpose here is twofold. First, to remind everybody of where we are in the process, and the second is to point out the revision based on the work that the committees are doing. So the major interaction here is between the PFC and the ID team. And as everybody is aware, we're in this committee process for both vegetation and road and recreation, where the subcommittees have been interacting with the ID teams. Somewhat of a delay this summer for both. In the case of vegetation, their recommendations in late spring addressed or asked questions that needed to be addressed in the field season data collection, and so they will be reporting on the status of that and refining their recommendations based on the results that they're reviewing in October. And then with road and recreation, the travel analysis process has taken longer than originally anticipated, and so they will be reviewing data, particularly the roads data, broken into 3 categories. Given the original timeline and where the committees are now, there is a added loop here in the diagram, and basically what happens is in the development of recommendations, there'll be an initial set probably from both of the committees, and then a question asked, is it ready for the final decision, the final recommendation by the entire PFC? If yes, then it goes on to the ID team to design the proposed action and alternatives, and from there to the line officer for releasing the notice of intent in the Federal Register. If the answer is no, that there's a need for an intermediate decision, and the committee chairs think that this is likely, then there'll be a loop work again with the ID team, get additional data, and refine the recommendations. And it's anticipated that this refinement will likely be addressing the quantitative objectives for the recommendations. So overall, the business process, the swim lane diagram, has a similar flow, but there's a modification to this decision block. Is it an intermediate decision that needs refinement? It goes through a loop, comes back with the ID team and the committee interacting. If yes, the group is ready for the final decision and adopts it by consensus, then the recommendation is passed on to the ID team to design the proposed action. Okay, behind door number 3 now for the agenda preparation is the swim lane diagram for NEPA. And I think we may have reviewed an early draft of this in late spring, but didn't spend a whole lot of time on it. But in any event, it's time to review it and make changes as needed, and then adopt it by consensus. There was no formal action taken on this swim lane diagram. Similar to the other one, there are 3 swim lanes: the line officer, the ID team, and the coalition. And the starting point is releasing the notice of intent to prepare an environmental impact statement in the Federal Register, and that initiates scoping. The ID team then convenes public meetings, and I'm guessing we'll also have a field tour similar to what was done with Mill Creek Council Mountain. They receive and document those comments and identify resource issues. Now, in order to keep the arm's length relationship between the line officer, the Forest Service, and the coalition, I've got a dotted line here representing the process we used last project, and that was the coalition submitted a FOIA request for the comments that were received. So any individual or any organization can do that. So there's nothing special going on here that would be a violation of FACA. The coalition then will review those comments, look for new issues. Are there scoping issues that were raised that would merit reconsideration of the recommendations and priorities by the PFC? If no, nothing would need to happen. If the answer is yes, there would be some modifications and comments submitted back to the Forest Service so they would be aware of the change in recommendations based on that new information. Then the ID team analyzes the alternatives, drafts the EIS, and releases the draft. At that point, the coalition engages again to review and comment on the draft EIS and submit a letter accordingly. And that letter and those comments would be reviewed as part of the preparation for the final EIS, and then the line officer would make his findings and publish the final EIS and the record of decision. I think a fair question, the coalition members may look at this and say, well, this doesn't eliminate what happened last time where there were surprises, and in particular with one watershed and the local population of bull trout and critical habitat. I think it's important that we distinguish between two different things here. There still could be surprises, but the new information or surprises would come from an analysis of the environmental effects from the proposed action or the alternatives, and that analysis may cause the coalition to regroup and reevaluate. How is that different from last time? This is just my observation, but I think in the Mill Creek Council Mountain project, the gap was not so much in the environmental analysis of the effects, but that there was a missing piece in the desired condition that should have been addressed in the previous swim lane diagram, the pre-project design. So the way these two swim lane diagrams changed the process, I think Kim and her team have done an excellent job of laying out the management direction, the management guidance for the coalition. We know what the sideboards are. There shouldn't be any resource specialist or regulatory agency that arrives late to the party and defines or identifies a new desired condition. We ought to be able to feel confident that we have those in hand. At the same time, the environmental review may uncover effects to the proposed action or the alternatives that would merit reconsideration. And in the review process of the draft EIS, the PFC would comment on that in letter form, and that would be incorporated into the line officer and the ID team's preparation of the final EIS and eventually the decision, the record of decision.